From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. It's Chicago Newsroom, and of course, that's the place where we like to sit around and talk about politics and all the things that we enjoy discussing. And today is Thursday, March 22nd, as we're recording this program, which is just 24 hours since we've had that morning after dramatic feeling after the election in Illinois that set the stage for a titanic battle for the political soul of our great state. Politicians appealed to our higher impulses with heartfelt pledges to improve the finances, the policies, and the operations of our sprawling state of Illinois and the great county of Cook. And when it was all said and done, when the polls closed and the early votes were all tabulated, almost all of the 15% of Illinoisans who bothered to vote, very nearly 2 million of us, said we thought it was time for a billionaire to stand up against a multimillionaire in the governor's mansion, and maybe for a millionaire to replace the ward boss in the assessor's office, and that maybe we weren't all that upset about the soda tax after all, maybe. And we think maybe we're probably kind of done with Pat Quinn. That would be my take. So now we have to easily see, we've really got to set our minds on the huge big deal election that's coming up in November, when we will all decide these contested races once and for, wait, what? What's this? Oh, there's a Garry McCarthy video? He's in? Oh, he trashes Rahm? Oh man, that'll be a slugfest. Hey, forget the 2018 thing. Let's move to 2019, shall we? Want to see the video? Want to see a little clip of it? Okay.
Unfortunately, Chicago's city government has lost our trust because of failed policies and the endless politics of bluster and bullying. I'm running for mayor to change that. This is one of the greatest cities in the world. I know firsthand just how strong and proud and welcoming Chicagoans really are. That's why it's so painful to see that under this mayor, we're awash in higher taxes, corruption, school closings, and violent crime. We don't have to live like this. Chicago does not have to live like this.
So there you have it. Garry McCarthy is in, and here are the people who will be able to talk to us about that and everything else about politics. For the first time on our program, Tahman Bradley from WGN is here from Channel 9. Great to have you here.
It's good to be here, Ken. Looking forward to it.
Carol Felsenthal, old friend, glad to have you back again. Carol Felsenthal, author and writer, Chicago Magazine, etc. And Dave McKinney from WBEZ, and just a great reporter for the state, worked for a number of organizations even before WBEZ. Glad to have all of you here today. So can we just forget all this 2018 stuff for a minute and talk about Garry McCarthy? Is Garry McCarthy a threat? Is Rahm Emanuel just completely beside himself with grief today?
I think he's got, first of all, he needs to get rid of the New York accent.
Garry McCarthy.
Yeah, but it is an interesting question, you know. Why this morning does he see Rahm in some way weakened by the results of this election? I'm not sure why, because Rahm was pushing, working under the table, as he usually does for Pritzker. Mm-hmm. And Pritzker, wow, did
rather well, didn't he?
Yeah, much better than I would have predicted.
I know that Mayor Emanuel is headed to Puerto Rico this weekend with Congressman Gutierrez.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's a moment when you can gain attention. We're still talking politics, and we're still talking about what will be forward-looking, and of course next year's mayoral race is forward-looking. This, at worst is an annoyance for Mayor Emanuel. It brings up Laquan McDonald, who'll have to explain that. Of course, Garry McCarthy will have some explaining to do.
Yeah.
And in the debates, in the forums, Garry McCarthy will be standing there, and it will be an annoyance for Mayor Emanuel for sure. And we'll see where his votes come from, but it certainly splits the vote. We'll have other candidates, and they'll try to coalesce and come together to get Mayor Emanuel in a runoff and beat him there.
You know, I just am kind of still trying to scratch my head and figure out what is Garry McCarthy's constituency, because the overarching thing here, there's just a feel that this is personal, that McCarthy is in this because he's ticked off that he got fired, and he wants to jam it to the mayor. But I don't know that sure, the mayor's got weaknesses, but as Carol says, I mean, his candidate's pretty well, they did pretty well, and I just don't know where McCarthy is getting his money from. I don't know where his votes would come from. So it's a little confusing.
I mean, he's popular among cops.
Sure.
And
Good name ID in the city.
And I think, maybe he's just trying to raise his name ID because, I think the mayor's races 2019, we're looking at that. We're not the governor's race, in my opinion. Bruce Rauner hasn't got a prayer. He is headed to defeat. I don't think it's going to be, it would have been a more interesting race if Visser Kennedy had won, but he did so well. And I was thinking about it this morning. What he did was very much what Blagojevich did. Pritzker went downstate when people really weren't, following. It wasn't too exciting to people who live in Chicago to watch these little, coffees that he had downstate. But that's what Blagojevich did, and that's how Blagojevich won the governorship. But I don't see, it just seems, the whole thing seems kind of boring, which is why I was looking so closely at that Lipinski-Newman race.
Well, if we're pivoting to the governor, you see the enthusiasm on the Democratic side, 1.2 million Democrats coming out to vote, 600,000 Republicans. There is repair work that needs to be done. There's healing that needs to happen in the Republican Party. Jeannie Ives and Governor Rauner, as we tape this, still have not spoken on the phone. It's tradition that
they're arguing about who should have called who.
Right. Well, the tradition says that she should have called him. Now, she says she'll vote for him, but that's just one vote.
Just one vote.
That's just one vote.
Yeah.
She's got to bring her 49% on board, and they've got to be able to concern. Look, there'll be battles in Springfield this summer. He'll campaign on repealing the 32% tax increase. He'll campaign on a $1 billion tax cut. So we'll see. He'll of course campaign on fighting against Madigan. He'll say that JB Pritzker is a tax dodger and that he is corrupt. But meanwhile, he's got to bring conservatives back into the fold. He'll need Jeannie Ives. Now, of course, this sets them up for as time passes this summer. There'll be some healing. I expect we'll see them together at some point. I do think, they'll decide that rather than having JB Pritzker, they'll want to go for Rauner, but she'll need to get that 10, and then the math still doesn't look great for Governor Rauner.
But
What a mess.
I'm sorry,
Well, no, I was just going to say a mess for Rauner because, I was looking at the county by county breakdowns, and he only won in the collar counties. He only won Lake County. And if you're a Republican in Illinois and you're going for statewide office, you've got to not only do what Carol said with the downstate vote, but you've got to assemble, big numbers in the suburbs. And in each suburb that he was in, he underperformed in 2014 from the primary he had then. And to win only Lake County, Jeannie Ives picked up every single one of those. DuPage, Will. That is a huge weakness, and if you're the governor and you have somebody, you can only muster 52% of the vote within your party, and your rival is 48% or a little better. I don't know. I mean, the pathway is really fraught with a lot of problems.
Where do Illinois Republicans go? I mean, they're not going to vote for JB Pritzker.
Well, they might go into their living room and change the TV channel.
Right.
I mean, that's unfortunate. I get the sense that they are a dispirited bunch, and you look back to the days of George Ryan, the final kind of few days or months of him, and there was that same kind of dispirited feeling in the party, where people were just kind of at a loss. Where is our leader? That what the party has now is a leader that is not bringing unity to the party. They don't have anybody else to look to even within the party structure. I mean, they don't have a U.S. senator they can look to. There's not like you've got a few members of Congress that are making names for themselves, but the party is just a wreck right now.
I thought it was really weird. Would be yesterday morning when Rauner first had a kind of a scrum with the press and just kind of went off on the same old thing about we've got to cut taxes. We've got, we've heard this.
Term limits.
Yeah,
he was talking term limits the day after he got 51%.
Maybe you ought to have something a little new.
I think he's waiting, hoping that the Chicago Tribune has some more transcripts.
Yeah.
I think that he's, just like the Chicago Tribune, you could say, made Barack Obama president by some of the FOIA requests that they pushed forward and the information that they got on divorce records. And interestingly, we saw the divorce records of Bruce Rauner come out, I believe, on election morning. And there's a lot in there, because I got them from my profile that I wrote of Rauner about Rauner leaving his first wife, the wife before Diana Rauner, an interesting
There's that
person.
word paramour in that document.
And,
Paramour.
yes, and the wife was pregnant with the third child. Then he marries Diana and has another 3 children. But I think there's got to be some blast of scandal, some blast of more conversations, really damaging conversations with a figure like a Blagojevich for Rauner to, we can't use the Madigan thing, it's old,
Even
you know.
so, though, those transcripts didn't damage him
No,
to
they
the extent
didn't.
in the primary.
They did not.
He had 2 credible opponents in Kennedy and Biss.
Right.
Underfunded somewhat,
Right.
but they weren't able to use that issue. And I would argue that a lot of black voters really kind of shrugged at what they heard.
You know,
They
No,
kind of
they did.
expect
That's a
how-
fact. It
yeah,
should have
right.
benefited Chris Kennedy, who made quite a play for black voters, talking about racial gentrification,
came into it too
calling
late.
out Mayor Emanuel.
Hold on
Too
just
late.
one second,
The
because
Kennedy without charisma.
I printed out this thing from the Sun-Times this morning. You got copies of them here, and we'll put it up on the screen too. Look at these colors here. I mean, orange is Daniel Biss, and the brownish color is Chris Kennedy. Most of Chicago is blue, JB Pritzker, and we all know our map of Chicago well enough to know that
South is blue.
African American Chicago pretty much went for JB
The
Pritzker.
South Side,
Yeah.
the West Side.
Yeah.
Look, he was helping ward organizations. They
Yeah.
found people who vote, and they turned them out. And I think we all expected that Chris Kennedy would perform much better
Yeah.
on the South and West sides.
Yeah.
He did
He
not.
did not.
Black voters were not troubled by
Right.
what they heard on the Pritzker tape.
I
That's just a
was
fact.
really taken aback, honestly, by the Kennedy campaign performance. I mean, you know, there was I don't know if I would say a laziness to it, but there was something where I didn't see him out enough. You know, if you're going to take on a job like this.
Later he did.
But it was
he
too late. It's like,
He wasted
you
so
have 3
much
months
time.
or 4 months or 5 months, even back to Labor Day of last year.
Yes.
Start showing up every place.
Yeah, but you know, look at, I think Kennedy is a big deal to my generation, to my mother's generation. But I don't think young people, even though the Kennedy family did come out, he had Congressman Joe Kennedy III out for him, which is another thing that I've been thinking about, which is like, where's Penny Pritzker? What's going on with the Pritzker family? Did you see the older sister, Penny Pritzker? You know, they had this falling out over the 2000 election because she was an Obama person and he was really a strong Hillary person. He picked the wrong horse, but boy, you didn't see her coming out. There's another good story.
Yeah.
Well, young people weren't voting, so
They just
the
didn't bother
Kennedy
to vote
stuff
at all, so-
should have connected with it.
Yeah.
They decided not to choose this Kennedy, and I agree with Dave's point. It was run almost like a hobby,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like when he brought out Raw Joy, his lieutenant governor candidate. They still were setting up the office.
Yeah.
They still were printing the campaign signs. They still only had volunteers. At that point, I think they had 12 paid staffers
Yeah.
on the campaign apparatus. That's not going to get it done against a guy who had $69 million.
No, it took an extraordinary effort, and I don't mean to malign Kennedy. I thought, you know, what about Kennedy?
good messaging from
Well, I'll tell you one thing about Kennedy that impressed me, and that was his concession speech. It was a very gracious,
Beautiful
very
speech.
gracious
Yeah,
speech.
yeah,
It was artful,
yeah.
and what it put on display was how the Democratic Party, in spite of this, divisive primary, has come together.
Right.
Did they have a unity breakfast? But
Well,
that last
He would have
go-round on WTTW a week or
Yeah,
so
that
ago,
was nasty.
they were, there's Kennedy next to Pritzker, calling him a liar. I mean, it was really an ugly, angry
The face of pay-to-play in
exchange.
Illinois.
And,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there
yeah.
are, of course, Rauner's campaign commercials right there. But,
Biss was tough too, saying that he
sure was.
disqualified himself, saying
Yeah.
JB
Yeah.
disqualified.
right.
So is it real? I mean, is this healing real? My guess is that it is, because they all know the stakes are so incredibly high that they really have to. They have to have a unified public.
I don't even know that they need healing. I think Pritzker's, I think the question is going to be, do we bring in Hillary? to give a speech.
Well, and to Democrats, they have such a unifying villain in Rauner. I mean, that
Yeah,
he-
well,
and
we do
in
have
Trump,
that.
and in Trump.
And so
Even
the
though
two of them-
Rauner has kept his distance from
Yeah.
Trump as much as anybody.
I just
possibly
wanted to go back one more scoop of this map we have here, because if you look at the orange, what I found really interesting about this is that this kind of this angle here along Milwaukee Avenue is where we kind of imagine the kind of the millennial generation of Chicago living, and then the more north side is where you see kind of like the older liberals, the people of my age, kind of living along the lakefront. So you see that Biss made some really serious some inroads here. If you look at it on a precinct by precinct.
Yeah, people heard the message. Look, he wanted to run hard left. He wanted to run as a progressive, and then we, I think in the media challenged some of his voting record, and so he couldn't do that. So he reconfigured and ran. I'm going to be the middle class governor. We've got a multimillionaire, we've got a billionaire. They're trying to buy the election. I'll be somebody different. He had catchy TV commercials. So there was and I used to argue with JB's people. Whether or not there was a Biss surge to start the year. I think there was, because he ended up finishing second because the campaign, again, run like a hobby in the beginning, but they launched when the calendar turned into 2018, and they sort of caught fire, and the message was out there. People had made up their minds about JB, but it was an effective couple of months.
I mean, it was interesting when you look at this map too. The neighborhoods and areas you point out, the progressive millennial thing. He also won McLean and Champaign counties downstate, home to ISU and the U of I. So he did well in those university communities. And I think for Biss, early on, had he been able to get Chuy Garcia in his camp, Garcia, of course, was with Kennedy. That would have been a big boost, because then it could have been maybe a stronger conduit to Bernie Sanders. Because can you imagine if Bernie Sanders would have come in and at least as he did with Garcia and I believe he endorsed Marie Newman.
Yes.
Had he come into Illinois and said, "Biss is my guy," that would have created serious trouble for Pritzker, or greater trouble. I don't know if it would have undid things, but it would have made things closer.
Is it fair to say that the incredible biggest victor or winner of this whole thing was Chuy Garcia? I mean, it just seems like in every possible way, Chuy Garcia just ran a perfect campaign.
I wonder if he's sorry he's not running for mayor, because that would have been an interesting race. But he did really, he had a great night. And Madigan had a mixed night. But just one more thing about Biss, I thought when he said that I send my children to public schools, albeit in the suburbs in Evanston, but I thought that was really affecting, and I was surprised that he was never able to build on that. And when he said that his taxable income was $30,000, wouldn't you think that would have really resonated with people? And all the offshore Pritzker-related stuff, the trusts in the Cayman Islands and so forth, I was listening to that, and I'm married to a lawyer, and I hear a lot of estate planning chit-chat between he and his partners. I found it so hard to follow, and I think, clearly JB Pritzker lied about it. JB and his brother, who's his business partner, did open up these trusts between 2008 and 2011, something like that. It wasn't all the grandfather, great-grandfather.
But you do have this thing.
But how do you digest that stuff, and how do you understand it?
You have this whole thing, though, that it's sort of like, it just seems to me like most of the Democrats just said, well, we got to fight fire with fire. We need a billionaire.
Right.
It never really came out as a public statement so often, but it seemed like it just kind of like it was this undercurrent to everything. It's like, well, you got to go with a billionaire.
Well, as was mentioned earlier by Dave, Bruce Rauner is the great unifier. JB told me one Wednesday, day after the election, that he's all, because I asked, what does this say? Are you worried about our politics, that extremely wealthy people have sort of taken over American politics?
Yeah.
And he said, well, that's interesting, but right now we've got to defeat Bruce Rauner. Then we can do campaign finance reform. Then we can change the laws.
There's just a lot about, what I hope between now and November, as all of us in the Fourth Estate, as we're covering these people, that we're able to flesh out more about what his plan is, Pritzker, for fixing the state's crummy finances. Because, he's skated by so far. in talking about, graduated tax increase, as have others in Springfield. But we haven't had the detail that we need to see who's paying what. What percentage of us will be paying more than the 4.95%.
I heard you yesterday interviewing him on that exact same thing, and I thought it was, I got to tell you, I thought you did an admirable job of trying. But boy, if Pritzker has any skills at all, it's the ability to just completely sidestep issues.
Yeah, it's an issue that we have to negotiate, he says. Well, at some point you've got to come clean and tell voters what it is, especially if you're changing the Constitution.
And how is he going to work with Madigan to make the changes that we would need legislatively? Because he won't talk about Madigan. He reminds me, this is a little gross, maybe I shouldn't say it, but if you have a dog and the dog poops on the carpet and he won't look at it, he's looking away. That's
I've
a
got
little
two
bit.
dogs that do that.
That's a little, he just won't. Madigan is still such a power and still so important. The other thing on the Kagi Berrios race, which was so important. Speaking of dogs, when I think of Fritz, I think of a dachshund. But I thought, nobody. Are we going to elect somebody with the name Fritz? But he did really well. But one thing we have to remember about him is he's also very wealthy, investment banker. He put a great deal of his money in. And the important thing is that somebody like this guy, young family, I don't know anything about his wife, whether she works, whether she brings in money, but he was able to just stop working, didn't need the income, put money into the campaign, and then he was able to run. And there's something so wrong.
Can I just, because I think it's an important point we raised with JB, who's campaigning on big ideas, and there's not any one thing. There's all these. So we knew Daniel Biss was about the LaSalle Street tax. We knew Chris Kennedy, the system is rigged. I'm going to straighten it out. And I think it was strategic so that JB can adjust however he needs to adjust and frame the argument however he wants in the general. And I didn't hear your interview with him, Dave. I just would be curious because what he said to me is I want to lift the tax burden on people. Now, that didn't mean repealing the income tax hike last summer. He was talking about, all right, we're going to figure out how to lower property taxes. No specifics there. So no plan kind of there. So what's his baby? What's the big thing?
Outside of legalizing pot, which he says will generate between $500 million and $750 million, that's the only concrete kind of financial plan we've heard. Look, you've got you got a pension burden that's $8 billion and growing per year, and how do you deal with that? You've got a $9 billion pile of unpaid bills. How do you deal with that? And then you just have the day-to-day operations of state government to deal with. How do you deal with that?
Well, luckily he's running against Rauner because Rauner hasn't shown that he's been able to really figure out any of that stuff.
But it was in the last, if I recall correctly, probably in the last few weeks that he just suddenly really kind of discovered this graduated income tax thing, right, and latched onto it pretty strongly. I heard a number of interviews with him where he said, we are going to do this. We are going to get a graduated income tax in Illinois. Well, as you guys have pointed out to him, that requires a constitutional amendment. It requires forward thinking for a year and a half, 2 years.
4 years. I think that is. I think he has a 4-year in his mind. We need to see the plan.
I don't think that voters are going to willingly go along on a graduated income tax because so many people are the ones who vote are going to look at this and just automatically interpret it as a tax increase. And then if you're going to try, as he kind of suggested yesterday and before, if you're going to try to deal with this by tweaking some statutes, and you're going to potentially run into problems with lawsuits because people are going to say, well, wait a minute, we have a flat income tax. Our Constitution dictates that.
And everything. So this is one of these things that has been a bugaboo of mine here for years, actually, is that whenever you get the left and the right together to talk about this, the left immediately runs to, we need a Wall Street tax or a LaSalle Street tax, or we need graduated income tax. These are the things that are going to save us. And then when you bring in the people who like to crunch the numbers and talk about the law, they very quickly are able to say, that's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen in our lifetime. It won't happen. So now we have a governor who has said that he's going to make it happen, and he's got pretty much a Democratic legislature. So my question is he just jiving us, or does he really think he can actually come up with a new way of taxing Illinois?
Jiving us, I'd say.
One vote for jiving us.
You know, what was the Bee Gees song, Jive Talking?
Yeah,
Can you hum a few bars?
So you're not expecting, being a multimillionaire yourself, that your taxes are gonna go up anytime soon?
I don't know, but you know what? Think about this for a second. I mean, Rahm, you know, I mean, all of the tax increases that he has put through in the last couple of years, and the fee increases, and these are all painful for all of us that live in the city. You know, it has stabilized city finances to the point that at least the bond rating agencies are noticing.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to have to happen at the state level too, where there's going to be pain. You know, if you're genuine about dealing with these problems the state has, you've got to do something to get more money in there. I mean, you could kind of make cuts around the edges, but we've seen what has happened over the last few years. You starve your university system. Well, guess what? You have Amazon coming to town, and they want a vibrant university system.
Right.
You know?
Don't you see Pritzker? He's got this. He's kind of wants to be the happy warrior. You know, I mean, he is. I find him to be a very sweet person. You know, but I don't know how he's going to make these decisions and how he's going to do it in 4 years, and whether he really sees himself being able to, you know, jump into a national role. You know, maybe be able to one up his sister Penny and get a cabinet job, or put his hat in the ring as VP or something. But I just and then this morning, what do we see besides the fact that McCarthy's going to jump into the mayor's race? We see that the metropolitan areas lost more population.
Right.
That's not so great. The week that is Amazon here? Are they coming today?
Oh yeah, they
tomorrow?
were here yesterday and again today.
Yeah.
Touring sites. You know, you made a point earlier, and I want to go back to it for a second. You talked about Chuy Garcia, and you know, he was on the air yesterday, and he had one of my favorite sound bites of the. Of the whole last couple of days. We're seeing the sunsetting of the Burke dynasty. You know, I mean, not only did Chuy get himself elected, Congress. I mean, that was easy. I think
it was kind of ugly, in my opinion.
But
shouldn't have happened that way.
But you know, the Dan Burke defeat was a pretty stunning blow.
That's huge.
And then you know, he was involved in the assessor's race as well. So I mean, he had a very good day. But that Burke story, you know, he says the sunsetting of the Burke dynasty is pretty wild, because I don't think that, you know, certainly the Burkes were blindsided. They thought that they were going to be able to hold on to Dan Burke's seat that he has held for 27 years. His challenger, Aaron Ortiz, has been alive for 26 years, you know?
And is what, a school counselor?
Yeah, and no background politically. And you know, all it shows is that, you know, here's a reflection in that part of Chicago. The demographics have changed sufficiently from, you know, being Irish American to Latino. And now you're seeing kind of the effect of the representation catching up with that.
And Chuy Garcia is in a position to actually challenge Big Daddy himself to go after Ed Burke, right? I mean, he could put somebody up against Ed Burke in his own ward.
I think he probably will. Someone in the Chuy orbit told me months ago that, you know, when you look at the Latino population there in that ward, why should we be afraid of Ed Burke? You know, we have the numbers. We outnumber him. And so Latinos, again, back to Rahm Emanuel's Puerto Rico trip, that's a crucial block. There's a reason why the mayor sued the Trump administration. There's a reason why the mayor wanted Chuy in Washington. You know, Latinos can be kingmakers in this
particularly
next
when you think about Ed Burke representing the Trump organization on a property tax appeal case involving Trump Tower and the president talking about, you know, a border wall and you know, shrugging his shoulders about DACA.
What about Ed Burke having drivers and bodyguards? I mean, I've always wondered about that. Why we haven't been able to dig out what is he holding over Rahm's head that he's cut in half?
The mayor reduced his security force.
You know, the person who I think also lost last night, when I was doing a WGN radio show, she called in, that's Jan Schakowsky, because she lost and she endorsed Marie Newman. Marie Newman lost, and then she endorsed the woman who's running. I can't think of her name, but she's was running against to run against Peter Roskam, and she lost.
yeah.
Women
and
didn't
the
do
guy,
very well.
Yeah.
and the
Kelly
the
Mazeski, I
guy
think you're
won.
thinking of.
And so I asked General, what's it going to be like when you go to a delegation breakfast in D.C. and you're seated next to Dan Lipinski, because it didn't surprise me that Luis Gutierrez did that, because he's retiring.
Yeah.
But it is very unusual for members of the delegation to go after one of their
So if we
own.
could talk Illinois 3 for a second, Maureen Newman versus Dan Lipinski. Kind of a nasty way to end the campaign by her not conceding, saying, I want him to suffer tonight.
yeah.
I mean, you're on the same team, you're Democrats.
Right.
That was
So
ugly
I
and
think-
stupid.
It
They
was
shouldn't
stupid
have
because
done
he
that.
wasn't feeling pain. He knew he had won that.
Yeah, no, they were very confident. They know that district, and what they knew is, if you're talking abortion, that maybe doesn't work on the southwest side, where where there are Catholics, where there are people, who are anti-abortion, and so
And even
they
with
knew
Latino voters, it's not.
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. So they
But they brought in this group, and I think that's the reason why Newman wasn't able to pull it off. Remember, she was double digits behind him. She came back so effectively.
Got on TV.
And then they brought in the Susan B. Anthony group. They brought in a lot of people, a lot of money, and troops to go door to door.
Well, but that's the
And
way
that-
it worked,
That
right?
that made a
You
big
get
made
a challenger,
huge
you
difference.
bring out the bigger guns.
Because Lipinski was depending on Madigan and Madigan's people to get, just as Rahm depended on Madigan's people to get him elected.
But I mean, I have a sense that Lipinski won this, but it's not much of a victory. I mean,
She's
don't
already
you get
running-
the feeling that
running again.
next time.
He's
oh, yeah,
vulnerable.
he's
But
kind
if
of
his
done for.
if his positions are more in alignment with Trump, and Trump is on the 2020 ballot,
Right.
Does that? How does that impact the Lipinski race
Right.
in 2020? I mean, I
Yeah.
think
Well,
there
he's
are
moving
Trump.
left. Lipinski really is changing. He changed his view on DACA. He changed his view on the minimum wage. He cannot change his view on abortion.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that will,
you're right
that
about
will
that.
hold us back.
But I think there are Trump voters in that district, and I think that they would be prone to coming out and helping him. And I think the turnout is going to be higher.
So you
in
think
2020
Trump could actually help him in 2020?
in a weird way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So we kind of glossed over Fritz Kagi, but to me, I think this is one of the real questions. Fritz Kagi was almost, in my opinion, the creation of the editorial boards
Yes.
of the New York Times, of the Tribune and the Sun Times, and I'm left with this question. Okay, big guy, you got it. You won the thing. Now what are you going to do? I mean, like the dog chasing the car, right? I mean, is he going to be able to transform that office? It's going to take years and years and years.
I was trying to
that.
pin him down yesterday on that question about, all right, so what are you going to do in your first year? Are you going to come in and boost all the assessments of these downtown office buildings?
Yeah.
And then what about, I hate to be fixated about Trump, but what about Trump Tower?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
are you
yeah,
going to do
yeah,
there?
yeah.
And he kind of bobbed and weaved a little bit about that, but that'll be an interesting thing to watch. And the irony of ironies is, if he really does any of that stuff, guess who benefits? It's the same group that people attack, the real estate lawyers.
Because
these-
they'll fight it.
They'll fight it.
And they'll make
right.
lots of money. But I mean, kind of like when you talk about, the 20-year-old guy who wins, the House seat or something, state legislative seat or something, that's not really that important. But when the guy who comes in as your assessor really has no particular experience at it, my question is, are you a process geek? I mean, are you somebody who gets really jacked up about looking at algorithms and trying to figure out if we can tweak this a little bit here and there?
Well,
I don't know if he is.
He's talked about going to a new model. He's talked about not taking tax assessment lawyer money. He's talked about not hiring his family. He's
These
talked
kids
about
are too young.
He's talked about working with Tony Preckwinkle, making greater investments in the office. He seems to think he can get it done. He says it's the kind of thing that can be fixed without money from Springfield, and then it's just a matter of, he campaigned on saying that insiders are manipulating the system, that it's all set up for people to make money, and that if you end the corruption, it'll be fixed, and
But
the
the
voters
thing
will
is-
judge him, hold him to that in 4 years.
The thing is, though, Tahman, it took decades. It took a century to build this
I know-
very important structure. And if
I
this
know that's
guy
the
thinks he's
talking
gonna
point.
come
I
in
mean,
and-
but
You're right, and it's almost there's something almost kind of Rauner-esque about this situation too, because you look at the way Madigan was aligned with Berrios, and Kagi presumably is going to have a Springfield agenda to do some of these things that he wants to do.
Yeah.
Well, he says he doesn't need it.
Well, maybe so. Maybe he doesn't need money, but at some point he's going to need to have the law changed for something. And is he going to make peace with Madigan? Because you remember Berrios' predecessor, Jim Houlihan, clashed with Madigan and eventually, I think, was driven out because of that.
And Houlihan wanted to run for mayor. In fact, he was just about to announce, and then he didn't do it. But the newspapers, I've been thinking about this for a long time. Do newspaper endorsements make any difference? And I concluded, no, they don't. And then, of course, the Sun-Times stopped endorsing completely, which I thought was outlandish and outrageous, and then started again. But in this race, the newspapers seem to have really made a difference. They not only endorsed them, but they pounded the people who still read those papers over the head. Don't forget, Fritz is our guy. And so I think they have an obligation now to keep on him and see if there's any.
They didn't do so well in other endorsements. But I can't let go of this. I just cannot. I'm obsessing about this. What happens when our new champion in the assessor's office sends his tax bill to the Aon building, and it's $11 million more than it was a year ago, and then they start calling up their buddies over at all the other high rises all over the loop and finding out that all of theirs are $10 or $15 million high? What happens to this poor guy? He gets ground into dust.
And what about the wealthy homeowners? I mean, they're in the same boat.
The wealthy homeowners. And here's the worst part about it. The poor people who are going to benefit from this will see their assessment drop by a few dollars, but it won't be that much, and they won't probably even really notice that their assessments went down. But the big guys will notice that theirs went up. And I just can't see him surviving in office if he's really seriously going to do this. He'll be impeached out of there or something.
Yeah,
something bad will happen.
But the bottom line is, for anybody who's lives in the city, lives in the counny, farewell to Berrios. He,
I don't
whatever,
say this as a,
whatever.
yeah,
I think I wouldn't want to be Fritz and have to actually accomplish what he's promised to do.
Yeah.
But Godspeed to him.
This is where he gets called into the room with the big green lights, and they say, "You are tampering with the primal sources of nature, and you will pay."
The so long to Berrios. I mean, I just the idea of employing every relative on the assessor's payroll was just outlandish.
He should have seen what was coming when his daughter lost her.
Well, that was a sign.
Yeah,
I remember
right.
buttonholing Berrios outside of a committee room in Springfield. It was right when my colleague over at the Sun-Times, Dan Miahopoulos, was just beating the crap out of Berrios for the payroll abuses, and so I go up to Berrios why do you do this? Why do you hire all your relatives? And then he just began to say, well, nobody raised questions when the Kennedys did it, and so he compared himself to Camelot. So we're losing Camelot here,
That is his answer for everything. I take the assessment lawyer's money because Kagi's a wealthy guy and I need money to fight off his attacks.
What? Yeah. This kind of. So, before we leave assessors, what about Andrea Rayleigh? Is this challenge of hers going to go forward, and are we going to have another? Are we going to have to go through another election here? I mean, what's going to happen?
Well, or says no. Forget it. She doesn't have a leg to stand on. It was handled so poorly.
It sure was.
It was a bust. But
I don't think Fritz has to worry.
You have to prove fraud, and it's not clear that we have.
I mean, we called around to some election lawyers prior to the vote and asked them that question, and the prevailing view was no. I mean, we've never had an election reversed in Illinois, for starters, but you'd almost have to go in and prove that the problem was so pervasive. Every single polling place had a problem, and then you'd have to also prove that she was within shooting distance of winning, and she wasn't.
She wasn't.
So it wouldn't have really perhaps mattered.
Okay, so let's talk about Brandon Johnson. All right, that's an interesting one. I mean, Brandon Johnson is the CTU endorsed guy who may or may not have has won his battle against
300
Richard
votes.
Boykin. 300 votes.
I
We
would,
don't know yet.
I would cite Ken, the old Klingon proverb, "Revenge is a dish best served cold." Look, Richard Boykin, railed against the pop tax.
Yes, he
and
did. Boy, did
is
he
a
ever.
thorn in Tony Preckwinkle's
Yeah,
side on
yeah.
many issues, and doesn't play along. Didn't accept that. He's a first-time commissioner. And at the end, they went looking for a candidate. They counted votes, and they counted more votes than him. He is someone who legitimately shakes up the establishment, calls out Rahm Emanuel for the city's violence. But you have to do it in a way where you play in the system. The machine lost in some instances, but you can only go so far. Tony Preckwinkle is a powerhouse. They found someone to knock him out.
I mean, we had him sitting right there in that chair, and I said to him, so I'm assuming that all you really have to do is just hang on for a couple more years, and then Danny's going to hand you his seat.
Right.
Danny Davis will just hand you his seat, and you'll be fixed for life.
I don't think he's going to get Danny. I think he's going to end up losing, and he's also going to end up losing being Danny Davis's successor. And he went to Trump's inauguration. I've never quite figured that out. Yeah, and he's being plastered with being a Republican.
Some dirty stuff there.
I think that Tony Preckwinkle was a big winner. Big winner.
I would say so.
And I
Barack
Obama.
Obama.
I think that she
endorsed
she wouldn't have
Didn't even
needed
need
him.
that.
But I think that she, in the end, as painful as it was to see the pop tax go down, I think it was probably a benefit to her because the pop tax was so irritating to voters.
Yeah.
It went away, and she said this is going to be her last term and she's retiring. I'm wondering, as now I'm really looking forward to this mayoral race. To me, that's the most fun of it. It's better than a presidential race. Is she going to jump
working
in?
for
and
Garry McCarthy?
Is she going to jump in and run? The Paul Vallis, the tragedy that he suffered, I don't know where he is, but when I was looking at him before the death of his son as a serious person, he was involved with those soup guys.
Yes,
so I don't know
Soups,
where,
yeah,
and he wasn't truthful about it.
Well, and the more that field gets crowded up, if it does get crowded up, the greater advantage it is for Rahm. It just splits that anti-Rahm block into pieces.
But I'm still not willing to leave the Brandon Johnson thing. This is a big win for the CTU, is it not? Or is it not? You guys seem unimpressed.
Karen Lewis, made some radio calls, and it's about counting votes, and there are a lot of teachers in the city, and they are still a force, absolutely.
But it is a switch in ideology, isn't it? We have somebody who was, I think it's fair to say, a more conservative guy being replaced by a more liberal guy, right?
And look at Fritchie too.
Fritchie,
assuming that Richard Boykin does end up losing that seat, Fritchie lost his seat as
Another
well.
anti-pop, so
Right,
pop
yeah.
tax fails, and
So-
so do the folks
and
who
that's
got
what-
one.
that's
And
what
Fritchie had those attendance issues too, which
Well, so did Bridget Gaynor. Hers were really striking, and she ended up. I see Bridget Gaynor is a really attractive person in a lot of ways, not in her attendance record, which is terrible both at the county board and at the Park District board. But boy, I could see her getting into an important race, and let's have some women in the mix of things.
Yeah.
I forgot where we were. We were talking
She's
about
got red hair, and she looks like a really great Irish woman, right?
the thing about Brandon Johnson to me is that I think that he looks like a kind of another one of these wedges that gets you into the city council races that are coming up, right? There are plenty of aldermen who I'm sure CTU and others would like to take a run at, and if you could bring down somebody like Boykin, maybe you could bring down any number of lesser lights in the city council.
yeah.
And that would be a problem for Rahm, I would think, but I don't know.
What do you think Burke will retire? Ed Burke, our city historian.
I can't. I don't know. Can anybody imagine Ed Burke actually doing it? And
or
saying he's gonna-
Madigan. They have some. There's some similarities between those two guys.
Yeah. So, where were we? We were talking about Well, it doesn't matter, but there are some changes coming.
And what about the Ira Silverstein race? That was an interesting one.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't struck by the fact that he lost, but the margin was pretty amazing. And Carol, that was like a rare instance where Schakowsky did kind of weigh in and have a winning race there, because she got behind Ram Vilivalam, the successor to Silverstein. But when that report came out about the sexual harassment case against him, and while it didn't find him, guilty of engaging in sexual harassment, it did, Julie Porter did describe his conduct as unbecoming of a legislator. That was just kind of that was the stake through the heart there for the guy.
That was the one, for people who don't remember, that was like many pages, hundreds of pages of emails.
Of embarrassing
Yeah.
emails.
Embarrassing
So like I always think about what is dinner like between the Silverstein and his wife, and will this have an impact on her being reelected to the city council? It's so humiliating for these women whose husbands have, she's probably in bed sleeping. He's sitting in his chair in the living room writing these sort of, silly, dumb high school stuff.
Yeah. Well, we're whipping around, the Jim Durkin held onto a seat. There was a Dan Prof candidate that had some money. $4 million spent on that race, the most expensive state house. Insane, but obviously he held on and was airing TV commercials really early, just bizarre.
Yeah, somehow or other. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that was more of a nuisance kind of candidacy really against him, because Dan Proft was so intent on creating trouble for Durkin and Rauner that they would just throw it at him. I mean, Durkin is a proxy for Rauner in a lot of ways. They've relied on one another. But he's kind of cut from the same cloth as Christine Radogna was. They were shared the same district. They're moderate Republicans, and for Proft and the crew there that were trying to take Durkin down, I mean.
Yeah, but they have access to money, so they can do it. Yeah. So what about our former governor? We haven't talked about Pat Quinn at all. How can we have not talked about Pat Quinn so far?
Because he seems like yesterday's news, but I read this morning on the fly that he said he's not going anywhere, that there are plenty of petitions and referenda that he could. I don't think Pat Quinn's going to, he's such an interesting man, really. He doesn't care. He's somebody who really doesn't care about money.
No.
And he's going to stay in the public sphere. And I thought there was something almost heartwarming, but a kind of a Quixote-ish thing about his running again.
Yeah, in one of the debates he invoked Jane Addams' name and threw a quote out about the only way to cure the ills of democracy is more democracy. And this was just after Rauner had screwed up the Lincoln quote in his budget address, and so I was interested in fact checking Quinn, and I called the Jane Addams Project in some town in New Jersey, and they're like, yeah, she really said that. and it just like, for a moment there I thought, oh, good for Pat, he didn't step in it. But those labor unions with him, they have not forgiven him.
They won't.
They never will for the pension bill and trying to take away pension benefits.
It's really interesting to look at, we're looking at these ward maps of Chicago, to look at county maps of Illinois in that race. And it's fascinating to me because it's kind of like the inverse of what happened before. You had who won the race?
Raul. Raul.
Kwame Raul took the collars and took the city of Chicago. So the top of Illinois is Kwame Raul, and every other county in the state went for Pat Quinn. Whereas when he ran for governor, it was exactly the opposite. It was the collars in Chicago, and everybody else was, when he was running against Rauner, or whatever. But anyway, he got a lot of support. What I'm trying to say is he got a huge amount of support downstate, which he didn't necessarily always have before. Anyway.
Could we talk about the Attorney General's race for a second?
Let's do it.
So what I said before about newspaper endorsements and how important they were in the assessor's race, well, I've never seen anything like the endorsements for Sharon Fairley. I thought that was fascinating, that every paper up and down the state endorsed her, and her qualifications are just, really super impressive.
She shined in those debates. She shined in them.
Yeah, and so what happened? I mean, I was very impressed with her. I read every one of those endorsements, and I knew she was going to lose. There was no way that she was going to win. So she is somebody who has hopped around to a lot of different jobs. She went to law school, I think, graduating in 2006. She's an engineer, a magna cum laude engineer from Princeton. And she's just a really, so where does she go from here? I think that's.
Well, I think she's got a future because I mean she conducted herself so well. I mean she seems so informed and poised, but again the problem in an 8-way field where labor is decisively behind one candidate, Raul, and the CTU of course endorsed him. She didn't have money. She didn't have any money. She had a couple of ads or one ad that I saw in rotation, but that was it. And in that same race, what about Scott Drury? I mean, he was on the air constantly, and he was just a non-factor. I didn't expect him really to be a factor, but in the end, it's like Quinn and Raul, and Raul pulled it out on the strength of labor, I think.
Yeah.
And drowned out, talented field Aaron Goldstein, who knocked out Dick Meld for Democratic committeemen. Probably somebody we'll see against. Nancy Rotering keeps running for the wrong thing.
Actually, she won a county. She won Lake County. Did you see that?
Well, she's mayor of
Yeah, she's mayor of Highland Park, but she actually won the county. So
Yeah.
But
I thought she was.
the heartening thing about the race, though, I think, is that you have the two top tier guys. You got somebody named Pat Quinn. You have an uninformed electorate, and running against Kwame Raoul, whose roots are in Haiti, and that's so resonant in these ugly days of Donald Trump. And I thought, wow, I wonder whether people are not going to be able. They're going to have a problem voting. They may have had a problem voting for Barack Obama, and they're going to have a problem voting for somebody named Kwame Raoul. And he pulled it out. And I thought, and he's a smart guy. I just don't think that Kwame Raoul wanted to be Attorney General. He wanted to be governor or mayor of Chicago. So we'll see. We got all these.
Well, what about Sharon Fairley? I mean, she gave up. Maybe she didn't want that post at COPA. It's too many headaches or something. But she was certainly a major player in Chicago politics in that position.
She was married to John Rogers, which is something that I didn't realize. So first he was married to Desiree. The social secretary in the Obama administration. I like this stuff. And then John Rogers was married to Sharon Fairley, which really surprised me. I don't think he gave her money or supported her, but they're now divorced. So anyway, I see her as somebody. Where she's going to go in this state, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think I sort of have one unrelated question to close all this out. Is like, all right, among our two gubernatorial candidates, who is going to pick up and carry the 3-state solution?
I was just asking that the other day, and where will we put the capital of Chicago?
Yeah, exactly. At our debate, I asked Marshall, where did you come up with that idea?
Yeah. And
he just had this kind of wide-eyed look, and he's like, it's like, okay, that's all I need to know.
I know these ideas just come up.
Oh, and I should mention while we're talking about the other candidate, Teal Hardeman does not think we were fair to him. I got some phone calls.
And what is his rationale?
Well, we covered everyone else. We profiled everybody else. But he was in except for the WTTW, final debate. He was in all the forums,
that's right.
every debate, and raised a couple $1,000.
And he made some very good points and seemed rational,
I'm not
like a
connected
good
to this mess.
Right, right. That's
but
right.
this was not when you were just against Pat Quinn. You were the only alternative. It was a different situation.
And there were just these situations like what we said with Attorney General, where you have a bunch of really excellent candidates, but they're just drowned in the number of other candidates.
I like Diber in that race too for some reason. I thought Diber was
I thought was very good.
He was articulate and just a downstater and folksy and.
So it's so easy to always say that there's just nothing but a bunch of idiots all running for office, but we saw here a number of really talented, great people who all elected to run.
The Roscommon district on the Democratic side, talented people across the board. Even had one guy who was 32 years old who has a bright future.
Yeah. Well, this was fun. I really enjoyed having you here to talk about this. It was a weird election in so many ways, and again, you also have to point out that only 2 million people voted, or 1.9 million people voted in a state of 13 million people. But
When you guys went to the polling place, when my husband went in the morning, we voted an elementary school. Nobody was there. I went at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was the only person in the polling place.
well, I mean, some of that I guess is early voting, but not much of it. I mean, in my precinct it was number 50, and I'm voting in the middle of the afternoon, and you know, it's just the way
Well,
it is.
a long time ago, they decided to make these gubernatorial elections in the off-year
Yeah.
cycle, and
Yeah.
this is the penalty for it, that people just don't come out and vote.
I never thought of that. How unusual is that for governors to be in the off-year cycle?
I mean, a lot of other states pair them up. And
So they run them in like the presidential years, right?
Yeah, but this happened back in 1976 or 8. I don't remember.
We're with Virginia and a couple of just weird states. Yeah.
Someday we should sit around and talk about CON and whether CON screwed us up in this Constitution and everything.
Can you imagine if you were, all right, no, that's another show.
Another show. We'll come back
It
talk
really
about
is.
that.
We're up against the
Too
clock.
Too bad that Dawn Clark Netsch is not alive for a lot of reasons, since I was a big admirer of hers, but she could come on and address that subject.
I mean, I really would love to delve into this whole thing about Pat Quinn's revisions to the state and to the legislature, and whether they've actually helped or hurt, since we've got a couple of years on it.
Yeah.
Another time. Hey, thank you very much for watching Chicago Newsroom. We're so glad you're here, and you know, you can watch us anytime by going to this address. That's where all of our shows are archived, and you can hear us on SoundCloud or iTunes. Lots of ways to hear or watch the show. Really want to thank Tahman Bradley and Carol Felsenthal and Dave McKinney for coming here today, and I hope you'll come back again sometime, since you're a first timer here.
This was so much
It was a
fun.
real pleasure to have you here. Thanks so much. And you were doing some good work on WGN the other day.
Oh, thank you for watching.
So, All right. See you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.